In the deepest archives of the Galactic Council, there exists a classification so terrifying that only 3 beings in the entire known universe possess clearance to access it. Mythological Species Documentation, Code Black. For millennia, advanced civilizations have shared whispered tales around quantum hearths, stories of a legendary warrior race that once walked among the stars. These beings supposedly felt no fear, showed impossible loyalty to strangers, and possessed a disturbing tendency to run toward danger rather than away from it. Most disturbing of all, they were said to pack bond with literally anything that moved, treating mortal enemies as potential friends and viewing certain death as merely an inconvenience. The Zephyrians called them the Blessed Insane. The Korthak Empire knew them as Firewalkers. The ancient Vailtar scrolls speak of those who fight the dark. Every rational species in the galaxy had long since agreed these stories were nothing more than evolutionary mythology. Cautionary tales told to young ones about the dangers of reckless behavior. After all, no intelligent species could possibly be that suicidally altruistic and still survive to achieve spaceflight. But when the Burning Reach, a sector of space where reality itself seems to hemorrhage with malevolent energy, suddenly erupted with an invasion force that devours worlds and leaves nothing but screaming void in its wake, the Galactic Council found itself facing extinction with nowhere left to run. That's when someone remembered the old myths. That's when they decided to find out if the legendary Terrans were real. They were about to discover that some legends are true, and some legends are terrifyingly understated. Ambassador Kethvar had seen many impossible things during his 4 centuries of diplomatic service, but nothing had prepared him for the moment he first laid eyes on a human being. The creature stood barely 2 meters tall, covered in what appeared to be primitive fabric rather than proper bioarmor, and possessed only 2 arms, 2 legs, and a disturbing absence of natural weapons. No claws, no venomous spines, no protective carapace, just soft pink flesh that looked like it would tear if you looked at it wrong. Yet somehow, this fragile-looking being had managed to pilot a ship through the most dangerous hyperspace route in known existence, and arrive at the Emergency Council session with what could only be described as a smile. "Greetings," the human said, its voice carrying none of the harmonic frequencies that marked civilized speech. "I'm Commander Sarah Chen of the Terran Federation. I understand you folks are having some trouble with hostile entities." The council chamber, a massive spherical structure designed to accommodate representatives from 47 different species, fell into absolute silence. Kethvar's gill slits fluttered in anxiety as he processed what he was seeing. The myth spoke of Terrans, but seeing one in person felt like watching a ghost materialize from vacuum. High Arbitrator Zexthul, whose species had ruled the council for 3,000 years, slowly extended her crystalline manipulators in what humans would have recognized as a welcoming gesture, though she had no way of knowing this. You are truly from Terra, the mythical world spoken of in the ancient archives." Sarah Chen nodded, and Kethvar noticed something that made his dorsal fins bristle with unease. The human's eyes, those strange forward-facing organs, seemed to be constantly moving, taking in every detail of the chamber, cataloging exits, assessing potential threats, and evaluating tactical advantages. It was the behavior of a predator, yet she maintained that inexplicable expression of friendliness. "Terra, Earth, Sol 3. Call it whatever you like," Sarah said, "though I'm curious how you folks knew to look for us. Last we checked, we hadn't exactly been advertising our location." Senior researcher Molgeth, whose species prided itself on maintaining the most comprehensive xenological database in the galaxy, stepped forward on his 6 legs, mandibles clicking nervously. "The ancient texts speak of your people, though we had believed them to be fictional. Cautionary tales, perhaps. Stories of a species that—" He paused, suddenly aware of how the next words might sound. "That what?" Sarah asked, and Kethvar caught something new in her tone. Not aggression exactly, but a sharpening of attention that made every survival instinct he possessed start screaming warnings. That defied conventional evolutionary wisdom, Molgeth finished carefully. Beings who formed attachment bonds with other species, who demonstrated what could only be described as irrational protective instincts toward genetic strangers, and who possessed a documented tendency to engage in what we would classify as suicidal altruism. Sarah laughed, and the sound echoed strangely in the chamber. Several representatives involuntarily activated defense mechanisms, chromatophore camouflage, chemical deterrent releases, protective shell closures, before they could stop themselves. "Suicidal altruism," she repeated, seeming to find genuine amusement in the phrase. "I suppose that's one way to put it. We prefer to call it doing the right thing, but I can see how that might look crazy from the outside. High Arbitrator Zexthal leaned forward, her ancient form crackling with barely contained energy. Commander Chen, we have summoned you, hoped that you existed, because our situation has become desperate. Are you familiar with the region of space known as the Burning Reach? The change in Sarah's demeanor was immediate and startling. The casual friendliness vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. Her hand moved to what Cathiva now realized was probably a weapon, though it looked nothing like any armament he'd ever seen. We're familiar with it, Sarah said quietly. We've been watching the situation develop for the past 6 months. The entity you're dealing with isn't just hostile, it's antithetical to biological life itself. Every world it touches becomes a dead zone where physics starts breaking down and reality begins to unravel. You've been watching? Arbitrator Veltan demanded, her vocal sacs inflating with indignation. While entire civilizations died, you simply observed? Sarah's eyes fixed on Veltan with uncomfortable intensity. We've been preparing. Unlike some species, humans don't charge into situations without understanding what we're dealing with. That entity isn't just powerful, it's using technology that operates on principles we've never encountered. It feeds on living consciousness, converts matter into something that shouldn't be able to exist in normal space-time, and seems to be backed by an intelligence that views our entire reality as nothing more than food. She paused, letting that sink in before continuing. The good news is we think we know how to kill it. The bad news is the process is going to require a level of cooperation and coordination that most species find uncomfortable. Researcher Molgith's antennae twitched with curiosity. What do you mean by uncomfortable? I mean, Sarah said, her smile returning but taking on a quality that made Kethvar's blood run cold, that stopping this thing is going to require people to voluntarily walk into certain death for the sake of strangers they've never met. It's going to require trust so absolute that you'll have to bet your entire civilization on the word of people you just met. And it's going to require the kind of tactical thinking that puts mission success above personal survival. The chamber erupted in alarmed chattering, chirping, and harmonic protests. The very concepts Sarah described were antithetical to every basic survival instinct that had driven evolution throughout the galaxy. You're asking us to embrace madness, Arbitrator Zexthal said finally. No, Sarah replied, and her voice carried something that made every being in the chamber stop and listen. I'm asking you to embrace humanity. See, what you call madness, we call Tuesday. And that entity out there? It's about to learn why humans have a reputation in our own mythology as the most stubbornly persistent form of life in the universe. She activated a holographic projector, and suddenly the chamber was filled with tactical displays showing ship formations, weapon specifications, and battle plans that made seasoned military commanders feel dizzy just looking at them. The entity feeds on fear and despair, Sarah explained, highlighting weak points in the enemy's attack patterns. It grows stronger when its victims panic, and it uses psychological warfare to break enemy coordination before deploying physical force. Unfortunately for it, humans have a documented history of becoming more dangerous when we're scared, more creative when we're desperate, and absolutely insufferable when someone threatens people we care about. Kethvar studied the tactical data and felt his understanding of warfare fundamentally restructure itself. The human plans weren't just aggressive, they were aggressively insane. They involved ships deliberately flying into enemy fire to create openings for other vessels, soldiers volunteering for missions with zero survival probability, and tactical sacrifices that would result in massive casualties for marginal strategic advantages. This is suicide, Admiral Therex stated flatly. Your battle plans assume casualty rates that would destroy any military force. Our battle plans assume casualty rates that would destroy any normal military force, Sarah corrected. But humans aren't normal. We're the species that figured out how to make fire because we were tired of being cold. We're the people who looked at the ocean and decided to sail across it because we were curious what was on the other side. We domesticated wolves because we thought they looked lonely, and we went to space because we were bored with our own planet. She gestured to another display showing human military history. We've been fighting impossible odds for our entire existence. We fought predators twice our size with nothing but sharp sticks and bad attitudes. We charged machine guns on horseback because someone needed to deliver a message. We flew into space and controlled explosions because we wanted to see what the moon looked like up close. The displays showed battle after battle, each one featuring humans doing things that should have resulted in extinction but somehow led to victory instead. Kethvar watched humans charge superior forces, sacrifice themselves for strangers, and demonstrate a disturbing tendency to get more dangerous as situations became more hopeless. The entity thinks fear makes species weak, Sarah continued. It's wrong. Fear makes most species cautious, which is smart and reasonable and evolutionarily advantageous. But fear makes humans angry. And angry humans are the most dangerous thing in the known universe. High Arbitrator Zextal processed this information with growing fascination and horror.
You're saying your species becomes more effective as a fighting force when facing certain death?
I'm saying, Sarah replied, that humans have never encountered a situation so hopeless that we didn't immediately start figuring out how to make it worse for the other guy.
This entity has spent millennia consuming civilizations that fought smart, careful, rational battles. It's about to face a species that considers impossible odds to be a personal challenge. She brought up one final display showing the current disposition of human forces. The numbers were staggering. Millions of ships, billions of soldiers, and weapon systems that operated on principles the Council's scientists couldn't even begin to understand. We've been preparing for this fight since we detected the entity's presence, Sarah explained. Not because we thought we could win easily, but because we thought it looked interesting. And now that we know there are other civilizations at stake, it's not just interesting anymore. It's personal. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The mythical Terrans were real. They were even more dangerous than the legends suggested, and they were apparently viewing the galaxy's greatest existential threat as an entertaining challenge. What do you need from us? Arbitrator Zextal asked finally. Sarah's smile became something that would haunt Kethfar's dreams for centuries. Just point us toward the enemy and try to keep up. We're going to show this entity something it's never seen before.
Which is?
A species that thinks extinction-level threats are fun. As the council session continued deep into the night cycle, Kethfar found himself constantly returning to one disturbing thought. If the ancient myths had understated human capabilities this dramatically, what other impossible things were these beings capable of? He was about to find out, and he wasn't entirely sure his sanity would survive the experience. The first joint combat mission between humans and the Galactic Council forces began exactly 17 hours after Sarah Chen's briefing, and within minutes, every military doctrine in recorded galactic history became obsolete. Captain Velker of the Andromedan battlecruiser, Righteous Fury, had commanded warships for over 2 centuries. He had survived the Korth War, the Plasma Rebellions, and the infamous Siege of Zirion Prime. He considered himself unshockable, professionally competent, and mentally prepared for anything the universe could throw at him. He was wrong on all counts. Human vessel indomitable. This is Captain Velker. He transmitted over the joint command frequency. Our sensors show you're flying directly toward the enemy vanguard. Please adjust course to maintain formation integrity. The response came back immediately, spoken in the maddeningly casual tone that seemed to be standard for all human communications. Hey there, Velka. This is Captain Rodriguez, aboard the Indomitable. Thanks for the heads up, but we're exactly where we want to be. You might want to back off a bit, though. Things are about to get spicy. Velkar's tactical officer, a competent Thraxian named Kickstal, looked up from his displays with an expression of profound confusion. Sir, the human vessel just accelerated directly into the enemy formation. They're outnumbered, 47-1. Surely that's a mistake, Velka muttered, but even as he spoke, his sensors registered something that made him question his own sanity. The Indomitable wasn't retreating or calling for backup. Instead, it was broadcasting what his computer identified as music. Rhythmic sound patterns that seemed to be increasing in volume and intensity as the ship approached certain destruction. Human vessel, please clarify your intentions. Velkar transmitted urgently. Do you require assistance? Negative, Captain, came Rodriguez's cheerful reply. We're just going to poke the hornet's nest a little bit. Might want to get your people ready for target acquisition. We're about to make some enemies very angry. What happened next violated so many principles of tactical warfare that Velka's computer systems actually crashed trying to process it. The Indomitable, a mid-sized destroyer that any rational commander would have used for reconnaissance or support roles, flew directly into the center of the enemy formation and opened fire in all directions simultaneously. But rather than attempting to maximize damage or achieve any strategic objective, the humans seemed to be deliberately trying to attract attention from as many enemy vessels as possible. They're painting themselves as targets, Kickstal whispered in disbelief. They're intentionally drawing enemy fire away from the rest of the fleet. The entity's ships, dark, writhing constructs that seemed to bend light around themselves, immediately converged on the Indomitable like antibodies attacking an infection. Energy weapons that could vaporize asteroids focused their combined firepower on the human vessel, which by all rights should have been obliterated instantly. Instead, something impossible happened. The Indomitable began moving in ways that defied physics. Not just fast or agile, but in patterns that seemed to predict where enemy weapons would fire before they actually fired. The ship twisted through space like a living thing, dancing between energy beams that should have been impossible to avoid, while continuing to broadcast what Velka was beginning to suspect was human war music. "How are they doing that?" Kickstall demanded, his mandibles clicking with stress. "Their engines can't possibly generate the thrust required for those maneuvers." "Unknown," Velka replied, but his attention was already shifting to something even more disturbing. While the Indomitable performed its impossible ballet of death, every other human vessel in the fleet was moving into attack positions with a coordination that suggested they had planned this entire sequence in advance. "All Council forces, this is Commander Chen aboard the Defiant." Sarah's voice cut through the communication channels. "The Hornets are now thoroughly stirred up. Recommend you begin your attack runs now, while their attention is focused elsewhere." Velkar looked at his tactical displays and felt his understanding of warfare undergo another fundamental restructuring. The humans hadn't just charged into enemy fire, they had deliberately sacrificed one ship to create the perfect attack opportunity for everyone else. The enemy formation, previously impregnable, was now completely exposed as every vessel focused on trying to destroy the madly dancing Indomitable. "All ships, begin attack sequence Alpha," Velkar commanded, his training taking over even as his mind struggled to process what he was witnessing. "Target the enemy command vessels while they're distracted." The joint fleet moved forward, and Velka got his first real look at human military technology in action. What he saw made him question everything he thought he knew about advanced weapon systems. Human ships didn't just carry energy weapons or missile systems, they carried impossible things. One vessel fired projectiles that seemed to ignore the laws of physics, curving through space to strike targets that weren't even in their flight path. Another ship deployed what appeared to be metallic clouds that swarmed over enemy vessels like living things, consuming armor and weapon systems with disturbing efficiency. But most unsettling of all was the humans themselves. "Captain!" Kickstall called out, his voice tight with something approaching panic. "You need to see this. I'm reading human life signs on the enemy vessels." "That's impossible," Velka replied automatically. "The enemy ships are in vacuum. Even with environmental suits, no one could survive exposure to the entity's energy fields." "Sir, I'm reading 43 distinct human biosignatures aboard various enemy vessels. They appear to be fighting hand-to-hand combat inside enemy ships." Velka stared at the tactical display, trying to process this information. Humans had somehow transported themselves onto enemy vessels that were actively engaged in combat in an environment that should have killed them instantly, for the apparent purpose of engaging in personal combat with beings that fed on living consciousness. "Human Commander Chen," he transmitted, his voice carefully controlled. "We're reading human personnel aboard enemy vessels. Do you require extraction assistance?" Sarah's response was punctuated by what sounded like explosions and the distinct noise of something that might have been gunfire. "Negative, Captain Velkar. Boarding parties are proceeding as planned. We're just having a friendly conversation with our new acquaintances about their life choices." Through the communication link, Velkar could hear distinctly human voices shouting things like, "Hey, ugly! Yeah, you with the tentacles!" and "Somebody order extra crispy?" along with sounds that suggested the humans were not only surviving their encounters with consciousness-devouring entities, but actually enjoying themselves. The battle continued for 3 hours, and by the end of it, Velka had witnessed things that would require him to completely rewrite everything he knew about combat, physics, and the fundamental nature of intelligent life. He watched humans use their own ships as projectiles, ramming enemy vessels at velocities that should have killed everyone aboard, only to have the crews somehow survive and continue fighting from the wreckage. He saw human soldiers floating through vacuum in nothing but basic environmental suits, using personal weapons that seemed to be specifically designed for zero-gravity combat against entities that existed partially outside normal space-time. Most disturbing of all, he watched humans take casualties that would have broken any other species' morale and somehow become more effective as fighters. When the Indomitable was finally overwhelmed and destroyed, taking Captain Rodriguez and his entire crew with it, the rest of the human fleet didn't retreat or even pause. Instead, they played what his computer identified as a funeral song and proceeded to fight with such savage intensity that the enemy formation simply disintegrated under the assault. "They're mourning their dead by killing everything in sight," Kickstall observed with the tone of someone trying to describe a nightmare. They're treating their grief as fuel for combat effectiveness. When the last enemy vessel was destroyed, Velkar found himself staring at tactical reports that read like fantasy novels. The humans had achieved a complete victory against overwhelming odds, but the methods they had used seemed to violate every principle of rational military strategy. "Commander Chen," he transmitted finally.
On behalf of the Council forces, I want to express our appreciation for your tactical assistance. However, I must ask, are these methods typical of human military doctrine?
Sarah's response was cheerful, as if she had just finished a pleasant recreational activity rather than the most intense combat engagement of Velkar's career.
"Oh, this was pretty standard stuff, Captain. We were actually being fairly conservative since we didn't want to scare our new allies. Wait until you see what we do when we're really motivated."
Conservative? Velkar repeated weakly.
"Sure, nobody used nuclear weapons as melee devices. We didn't deploy any of the reality warping equipment, and we managed to avoid causing any significant collateral damage to local spacetime. All in all, a nice, quiet little skirmish." Velkar looked around his bridge, noting that every member of his crew was staring at him with the same expression of shocked disbelief that he was certain was on his own face. "Commander Chen," he said carefully, "when you say reality warping equipment, what exactly do you mean?" "Oh, you know, the usual stuff. Weapons that attack yesterday, shields that exist in next Tuesday, missiles that arrive before they're fired. Basic temporal warfare gear. We figured we'd save that for when things get really serious." The communication channel went quiet for several minutes while the Council forces tried to process the implications of what they had just heard. Finally, Admiral Ferrex's voice cut through the silence. "Commander Chen, exactly how powerful are human military forces?" Kara's answer was delivered in the same casual, friendly tone she had used throughout the engagement, but somehow had managed to chill the soul of every being who heard it. "Admiral, we've been holding back for the past few thousand years because we were worried about being too scary for the neighbors, but now that we know there are good people out there who need protecting, and since this entity seems to think it can just barge in and start eating civilizations." She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried something that made veteran warriors feel like frightened children. "Well, let's just say it's about to find out why humans are the only species in our local galactic region that has never been successfully conquered by anyone, including ourselves." As the combined fleet began moving toward the entity's main stronghold, Velka found himself contemplating a disturbing thought. If this had been the humans holding back, what would they look like when they decided to get serious? He was about to find out, and he was beginning to suspect that the answer might be more than his sanity could handle. The entity's main stronghold wasn't just a structure, it was a perversion of reality itself. Ambassador Kethvar stood on the observation deck of the Council flagship Eternal Wisdom, staring through reinforced viewing ports at something that shouldn't have been able to exist. The entity's fortress was a massive construct that seemed to be built from crystallized pain and solidified darkness, stretching across several star systems in configurations that hurt to look at directly. Space itself was twisted around the structure, creating zones where light moved backward and time flowed in loops. "Sensors can't get reliable readings," reported Chief Science Officer Dr. Yilmeth, her crystalline voice tinged with frustration. "The entity's presence is interfering with basic physics. Matter doesn't behave consistently within its sphere of influence, and some of our instruments are returning readings that suggest certain areas exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously." High Arbitrator Zexthal turned her ancient form toward the communication station. "Commander Chen, are your forces prepared for this level of spatial distortion?" Sarah's response came through with characteristic human casualness, though Kethvar was beginning to recognize the subtle edge that entered her voice when she was looking forward to violence. "We've dealt with worse, Arbitrator. Though I have to admit, this thing has style. It takes real commitment to make an entire star system look like a geometric nightmare." "Commander," Admiral Therix interjected, his forearms gesturing at the tactical displays, "our combined analysis suggests this structure is impossible to assault conventionally. The entity has fortified positions that exist partially outside normal space-time, weapon systems that fire backwards through causality, and defensive fields that convert attacking forces into raw energy to power its own systems." "Yep," Sarah agreed cheerfully. "It's a real Fortress of Doom situation. Good thing we brought the right tools for the job." Kethvar felt his gill slits flutter with anxiety. "Commander Chen, what tools exactly are you referring to?"
The kind we usually save for special occasions.
"Admiral, you might want to move your forces back a few light years. Things are about to get weird." "Weird how?" Dr. Yilneth demanded. Well, Sarah said, and Kethvar could hear what sounded like massive machinery powering up in the background of her transmission. We're about to introduce this entity to some concepts it's probably never encountered before, like friendship, teamwork, and the human tradition of solving impossible problems by hitting them with increasingly ridiculous amounts of force until they stop being problems. The human fleet, which had been maintaining a standard attack formation, suddenly began moving in ways that made Kethvar's head hurt. Ships were spacing themselves across multiple dimensions, some vessels appearing to exist in several locations simultaneously, while others were broadcasting energy signatures that suggested they were somehow operating from parallel timelines. "What are they doing?" whispered Chief Tactical Officer Mordan, his mandibles clicking nervously as he tried to track the human fleet's movements. "They're deploying something called a temporal assault matrix, Dr. Tenjiv," Yilneth reported, her voice filled with academic fascination and growing terror. "According to the data they're sharing with us, they're positioning their forces to attack the entity from multiple points in time simultaneously." Arbitrator Zexthul's energy field flickered with disbelief. "That's impossible. Temporal warfare requires technology that shouldn't exist. The paradox implications alone. Humans apparently don't worry about paradoxes," Dr. Yilneth continued, her voice taking on the tone of someone reciting from a particularly disturbing textbook. "They seem to operate on the principle that if time travel creates problems, the solution is more time travel, until the problems cancel each other out." The first human assault began exactly 13 minutes later, and it immediately became clear that every previous battle had been the equivalent of humans politely knocking on doors before entering. The entity's fortress, which had successfully withstood attacks from dozens of advanced civilizations over the course of millennia, suddenly found itself under assault by weapons that attacked from yesterday, tomorrow, and several alternate Tuesdays. Human ships were firing missiles that arrived before they were launched, deploying boarding parties that had apparently been fighting inside the fortress since before the battle started, and coordinating their attacks across multiple timeline branches simultaneously. "This is impossible," Admiral Therex stated flatly, watching his instruments register battle events that were happening in temporal sequence that violated causality. "You cannot coordinate military operations across multiple timelines. The computational requirements alone would require more processing power than exists in the known universe. Humans apparently use what they call intuitive temporal navigation." "Dr. Kassa," Yilneth reported, her voice now reaching frequencies that indicated severe stress. "They seem to just figure it out as they go along. Their computers aren't calculating temporal paradox resolution. Their crews are just improvising their way through it." Kethvar watched the tactical displays show impossible things. Human soldiers who had been killed in the initial assault somehow appearing deeper inside the fortress, fighting battles they had technically already lost. Ships that had been destroyed were providing fire support from timeline branches where they had somehow survived. Most disturbing of all, human forces seemed to be coordinating with alternate versions of themselves from timelines where the battle was going differently. "Commander Chen," Arbitrator Zexthul transmitted, her voice carefully controlled. "Our sensors are detecting severe temporal instability around the entity's fortress." "Are you certain your operations aren't risking catastrophic paradox formation?" Sarah's response was punctuated by sounds that Kethvar's computer couldn't identify, though they suggested massive explosions happening in dimensions that weren't supposed to exist. "Oh, we're definitely causing paradoxes." "That's kind of the point. See? This entity thinks it's hot stuff because it can manipulate local space-time and feed on consciousness. But humans have been breaking the laws of physics since we figured out how to make fire underwater." "You can't make fire underwater, Doctor," Yilneth pointed out automatically. "Tell that to my cousin Jimmy," Sarah replied. "The point is, this entity is used to fighting civilizations that follow rules. Humans stopped following rules the day we domesticated wolves by feeding them snacks and decided that gravity was more of a suggestion than a law." As the battle continued, Kethvar began to understand what Sarah meant. The entity's defenses were designed to counter rational military strategies that operated within the normal flow of causality, but humans were attacking from multiple timelines simultaneously, coordinating with versions of themselves that shouldn't exist, and somehow managing to maintain unit coherence across paradoxes that should have torn reality apart. "The entity is adapting," reported Mordan, his voice tight with professional interest. "It's deploying countermeasures designed to destabilize temporal manipulation." "Good," Sarah's voice came back immediately. "That means it's paying attention to us instead of trying to devour inhabited systems." "Time for Phase 2. "Phase 2?" Kethvar asked weakly. What happened next made everything they had witnessed so far look like a polite diplomatic exchange. The human fleet suddenly split into groups that began attacking the fortress from what Dr. Yilnith's instruments identified as alternate dimensions. Not just parallel timelines, but completely different versions of reality, where the laws of physics operated according to different principles. Ships from a dimension where the speed of light was apparently negotiable were coordinating with vessels from a reality where mathematics worked backward, all while maintaining tactical coordination with units that existed in dimensions where the concept of existence itself was interpreted differently. How, was all Admiral Therix managed to say. Humans are apparently native to a multiversal reality cluster, Dr. Yilnith explained, her voice now reaching subsonic frequencies that indicated complete intellectual breakdown. They don't just exist in one timeline or one dimension, they exist in all possible versions of reality simultaneously. They're not using technology to access alternate dimensions, they're just going home. The entity, which had survived every previous assault by adapting to its enemy's strategies, suddenly found itself facing an opponent that didn't just break rules. It existed in realities where those rules had never applied in the first place. Human forces were attacking from dimensions where the entity's defenses couldn't function, using weapons that operated according to physics that simply didn't recognize the entity's advantages. But the most human moment of all came when the fortress began collapsing under the multi-dimensional assault, creating a massive instability that threatened to drag the entire star system into a dimensional collapse. All units, we have a problem. Sarah's voice cut through the communication channels, finally losing its casual tone. The entity's death throes are creating a reality cascade that's going to take out everything within 50 light years unless someone stabilizes the dimensional matrix. Stabilizing requires someone to remain inside the collapse zone. Dr. Hone, Yilnith reported, her voice hollow with understanding. It's a suicide mission.
Yeah, we figured, Sarah replied, and her tone was back to cheerful.
Good thing humans specialize in suicide missions. All Council forces recommend you pull back to minimum safe distance. We'll handle the cleanup. Commander Arbitrator Zexthal transmitted urgently. You cannot sacrifice your entire fleet for our sake. The strategic loss would be catastrophic. Who said anything about sacrifice? Sarah laughed. We're just going to stay behind and make sure this thing dies properly. Don't worry about us. Humans are surprisingly hard to kill permanently, especially when we're motivated. Kethvar watched in fascination and horror as the human fleet moved deeper into the reality cascade instead of retreating. Ship after ship disappeared into dimensional instabilities that should have erased them from existence, but their communication signals continued transmitting tactical updates and what sounded distinctly like human war songs. They're not dying, Dr. Yilnith whispered. They're somehow maintaining coherent existence inside a multi-dimensional collapse. They're fighting the entity's death from within the dissolution zone itself. The battle lasted 7 hours, though time was flowing so inconsistently within the collapse zone that instruments couldn't provide reliable measurements. When it finally ended, the entity's fortress was gone, the reality cascade had been stabilized, and the human fleet emerged from what should have been certain annihilation, looking slightly singed but otherwise intact. Commander Chen, Kethvar transmitted, his voice barely controlled. How did you survive inside a dimensional collapse? Oh, that, Sarah replied casually. Turns out humans are really good at existing in places where we technically shouldn't be able to exist. We've had lots of practice. Practice? Arbitrator Zexthal asked. Sure. We've been living on a planet in a star system that shouldn't be stable, in a galaxy that's apparently full of impossible physics, in a universe that most mathematical models say should have collapsed immediately after it started expanding. Surviving inside a reality cascade is just Tuesday for us. As the combined fleet began the journey back toward Council space, Kethvar found himself reviewing combat reports that read like the fevered dreams of a physicist suffering from dimensional sickness. Humans had not just defeated an entity that had threatened the entire galaxy, they had done it by casually ignoring every law of physics that made such an entity dangerous in the first place. Ambassador Kethvar, Arbitrator Zexthal called him, over to the senior staff briefing area. We need to discuss the implications of what we've witnessed. Kethvar glided over, his mind still struggling to process everything he had seen. Yes, Arbitrator? The humans didn't just defeat the entity, she said slowly. They demonstrated capabilities that suggest they could defeat anything. Their military technology operates on principles that transcend conventional science. Their tactical doctrine treats impossible situations as routine challenges, and their personnel seem to be physically and psychologically incapable of accepting defeat. She paused, her ancient energy field flickering with deep thought. Ambassador, what exactly are humans? Kethvar considered the question, thinking back through everything he had witnessed. The casual disregard for conventional tactics, the cheerful acceptance of certain death as a minor inconvenience, the disturbing tendency to become more dangerous when facing impossible odds. I think, he said finally, that humans are what happens when a species evolves to survive in a reality that actively tries to kill everything in it. They're not just adapted to impossible situations, they're adapted to impossibility itself. And now they know about us, Arbitrator Zextel added quietly. Yes, Kethvar agreed, and based on what I've observed, that means one of two things. Either we're about to be protected by the most impossibly powerful guardians the galaxy has ever seen, or... She prompted. Or we're about to discover that there's something even humans consider worth worrying about, and we really don't want to meet whatever that might be. As the fleet continued its journey home, Kethvar reflected on the ancient myths that had led them to seek out the legendary Terrans. The stories had spoken of warriors who defied death, showed loyalty to strangers, and treated hopeless situations as personal challenges. The myths, it turned out, hadn't been exaggerated. If anything, they had been embarrassingly conservative. And now the humans were asking questions about galactic history, showing interest in council politics, and making casual references to helping out with any other problems that might come up. Kethvar wasn't sure whether to be relieved or terrified that humanity had apparently decided to adopt the entire galaxy as their new responsibility. Probably both.